In the previous lesson, we learned about pseudo-classes. Now we need to cover pseudo-elements. So what are pseudo-elements and how do they differ from pseudo-classes? Pseudo-elements allow us to style specific parts of a selected element, usually the beginning or end of the element, but sometimes other parts as well. This is different from pseudo-classes, which allow us to style elements based on some user input or on the element's position in the HTML tree. The syntax for pseudo-elements is 2 colons followed by the pseudo-element name. They're often attached to other selectors, but sometimes they don't need to be, and we'll see examples of that later. Now there's one thing I want to point out before we start trying out a bunch of pseudo-elements together. Occasionally, as you look at other people's code and examples on the internet, you'll notice pseudo-elements with only 1 colon instead of 2. Originally, pseudo-elements were allowed to have 1 colon instead of 2, so they still work like that in most browsers. But nowadays, the formal specification says that there needs to be 2 colons, so always try to use 2. There are a lot fewer pseudo-elements compared to pseudo-classes. While there are several dozen pseudo-classes, there are barely more than 10 pseudo-elements, and most are rarely used. If you want to see the list of all pseudo-elements, you can follow the link on this slide. I've also included it in the lesson description beneath this video, so scroll on down if you'd like to click on it. The 4 common pseudo-elements that we'll be trying out together are listed on this slide. First, we have the first line pseudo-element. Let's try it together now in Replit. Go ahead and make a new REPL. You can name it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine pseudo-elements. Then click the Create REPL button. After all the previous lessons, you hopefully know the drill by now to set up our HTML and CSS from scratch. Delete the script.js file and delete everything inside the style.css file and everything inside the index.html file. Click the Run button so that we have a completely blank page. The first thing that always goes in our HTML document is the doc type preamble. Make that now. It will be a left arrow, an exclamation point, the word doc type in all uppercase, a space, the word HTML in all lowercase, and a right arrow. Next we need to add our 3 required elements. Our root level element, which is the HTML element, the one that literally has the letters H, T, M, and L inside of it. Then add the head element and the body element inside of the HTML element. Now go ahead and give yourself some space in the head element because we need to connect our CSS file to this HTML file before any of our styles will work. To do that, we can use the link element with 2 attributes, an href attribute with a value of style.css, and a rel attribute with a value of stylesheet. Next, go ahead and give yourself some space in the body element, and then add a paragraph element with the text, "Hot damn, this is going to be a really long paragraph," so that it spreads across multiple lines. After that, hit the Run button, and we should see it appear in the preview window. If some of you are working on very large screens, your paragraph might only be on 1 line. To fix this problem, we can force our paragraph onto 2 or more lines using the line break element, which causes a line break in our text. It's a void element, so it doesn't need a closing tag. The line break element is simply a left arrow, the letters B, and then R, and then a right arrow. Add that now, somewhere in the middle of your text in the paragraph. Hit the Run button again, and you'll definitely have 2 lines of text in the preview window. Now flip over to your CSS and we'll try out the first line pseudo-element. Make a new rule using the type selector for our paragraph element, which is the letter P, and then 2 colons followed by first dash line. After that, we will always need our curly brackets. And inside the curly brackets, let's use a new CSS property that we haven't learned yet in the lessons, the background color property. We'll cover this property in much more detail a few lessons from now, but for now, all you need to know is that it works a lot like the color property. except instead of setting the color of the text in an element, it sets the color of the background in an element. Type out background-color, then a colon, and then orange, followed by a semicolon. Hit the Run button, and we'll see that the background of the first line of our paragraph is now orange. That's the power of pseudo-elements. We're now able to style specific parts of our elements without having to style the whole thing at once. Next, we have the before and after pseudo-elements, which allow us to add text or styling at the beginning or end of elements. There's all sorts of interesting things that we can do with these two after we've learned more CSS properties, so we'll cover them again in later lessons. For now, let's try out a couple simple examples in Replit. Imagine for a moment that we're cryptocurrency investors or gamblers or degenerates, whichever we prefer to be called. We want to build our own web page, and we want all of the links on our web page to have a small Dogecoin icon in front of them. We can make that happen with the before pseudo element. The before pseudo element allows us to add styles, text, or images to the beginning of an element. To try this out, flip back over to your HTML page and make a division element beneath your paragraph element. Inside this div, make an anchor element with the text check crypto prices and an href attribute with a value of https://coinbase.com. Hit the Run button, and we should see it appear in the preview window. After that, flip over to our CSS file so we can try out the before pseudo element. Beneath the existing CSS rule, add a type selector for our anchor element, which will just be the letter A, and then 2 colons followed by before, and finished with a pair of curly brackets. Inside the curly brackets, we need to use a new CSS property that works with the before and after pseudo elements. It's called the content property, and its value will be the text or image that we want to place before our anchor element. We'll go into more detail on the content property in later lessons. For now, just follow along. Go ahead and write content, and then a colon, and then a pair of double quotes, and then the word yo inside the double quotes. The yo text is going to be our test to make sure that it works, and then we'll learn to use an actual image in the content property in just a minute. Now hit the Run button, and we should see the word yo appear in front of our anchor element in the preview window. Nice work, but how do we switch that out for an image instead? Well, now would be a great time to look at how the content property works on MDN. Remember, if you get stuck or see some HTML, CSS, or JavaScript code that you don't understand, check MDN first. If that still doesn't work, you can use Google or ask an AI like ChatGPT for some examples and explanations. Always try it yourself first though, or you won't learn anything. On MDN, we see a few examples of the content property being used with the before pseudo element at the top of the page. Scroll down to the syntax section and start reading. It looks like we can use the web address of an image. The syntax seems to be that we write out the word URL, followed by a pair of parentheses. Then inside the parentheses, we need a pair of double quotes. Finally, inside the double quotes, it looks like we can write a web address. Normally, you'd need to search for one on Google, but to make this easier for you, I've included a web address to a small Dogecoin logo beneath this video. So go ahead and copy that. Flip back over to Replit and let's update our pseudo element. Delete the double quotes and the word yo in the content property and replace it with the word URL. Then a pair of parentheses, then double quotes inside the parentheses, and then paste our web address inside the double quotes. Hit the Run button and we'll see our Doge in the preview window in front of the anchor element. Nice work! Now if you thought you'd be clever and use a different image of your own choosing, you might be stuck with a very large image at this point. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to decrease its size without learning a bunch of other CSS properties. We won't learn how to do it for several more lessons, so you're stuck with the large images for now. At this point, we can also try out the after pseudo element. It works similarly to the before pseudo element, but will allow us to style at the end of an element instead of the beginning. Let's use it with our existing anchor element to add a sparkles emoji onto the end of our link. Beneath our existing CSS rules, go ahead and write an A for the anchor element, then 2 colons, then the word after, and finish it with a pair of curly brackets. Inside the curly brackets, use the content property, followed by a colon, and then a pair of double quotes. Inside the double quotes, this is where we'll put our sparkles emoji. We can easily find a list of all emojis on a handy website called Emojipedia, so open up a new tab and search for Emojipedia. Find the link to Emojipedia and click on it, and then search for sparkles in the search bar on Emojipedia. In the list of results, click on sparkles, and then find the copy button so that we can copy-paste this emoji. Click on the copy button and then flip back over to Replit. Inside of our double quotes in the value of the content property, paste the sparkles emoji. Now hit the run button and we should see it appear after our anchor element. Good job. Also, because we used a type selector with this pseudo element rather than a class or ID selector, it should apply to all anchor elements on our page. So flip over to our HTML and let's make one more anchor element to see if our styles apply to the second one as well. Make a new div underneath the existing div and then add an anchor element inside of it. You can make the text say whatever you want. I'll make mine say Doge to the moon. Then we can link to another crypto exchange. So I'll add the href attribute with a link to https://kraken.com. Hit the run button and notice that our second anchor element is also styled with the before and after pseudo classes. Pretty cool, right? Last, we have the selection pseudo element. The selection pseudo element will allow us to change the highlight color of the text in our elements. What do I mean by highlight color? I mean when we click and drag over some text on a web page. This highlighted text is usually colored differently depending on your web browser and operating system. We can overwrite that default color and change it to be whatever we want using the selection pseudo element. Let's try it out together now. Beneath our divs, make a paragraph element with whatever text you want inside of it. Let's also give this one a class of test. Click the run button and we should see it appear in the preview window underneath our other elements. Flip over to our CSS and let's add the pseudo element beneath our existing CSS rules. Do you remember how class selectors work? They always start with a dot. So go ahead and write a dot followed by the class name, which in this case is test, then 2 colons, then the word selection, followed by a pair of curly brackets. Inside the curly brackets, let's use the background color property that we learned earlier in this lesson to make the highlighted color green. So write background dash color, colon, green, and finish it with a semicolon. Hit the run button, and now try to highlight your text by clicking and dragging the mouse over it. Looks like it's green to me. Good job. The reason we used a class selector with this pseudo element was so that you understand that just like pseudo classes, pseudo elements work with any of our basic selectors, whether that's the ID selector, attribute selector, type selector, or class selector. That's it for this lesson. Take a break if you need it, and then head on over to the next one.